How's it going, everybody? Welcome to my channel. Today we have a very good prompt for you guys called longest common prefix. This is a very good prompt, so make sure to pay close attention to the problem statement, right? So I'm about to read it for you guys, right? So write a function to find the longest common prefix string, right, amongst an array of strings, right? So if there is no common prefix, return an empty string, right? So a very concise prompt statement, right? So this is exactly how we like them, right? So it says example 1, right? We're given this thing. It's called flower, flow, flight, right? So we have a bunch of words, right? We need to find, right, the task given, right, to find the longest common prefix, right? So for this example, we see flower, flow, flight, right? See the largest common prefix is FL, right? Because that's the prefix, that's the largest that we can see that they have in common, right? You know, this is why we have the name longest common prefix, right? So for this example, right, you know, you can see that they don't have any common prefix, right? You know, right? So we return an empty string, right? You know, because they don't have a common prefix, right? You know, because this starts with a D, this starts with an R, starts with a C. You know, there's no common one, right? That it starts with. So that's how, you know, we can, you know, solve it, right? So how do we solve it, right? You know, now that we understand the ask, right? You know, we're tasked to find the longest prefix that we could find, right? That's common across all of the different words, right? You know, so let's say, for example, we had flower, flow, flight, and then we added car in there, right? Then the longest common prefix would have been an empty string because, you know, car does not start with FL, right? So we couldn't return that as an answer, right? So you see, it needs to be common across all of the different strings. So how do we go ahead and solve it, guys? Right? It's kind of the thought process that we need to come up with, right? So how do we do it, right? You know, so intuitively, right? You know, we need to find, right? So we look at the first one, right? You know, how do we check, right, the remaining strings, right, the other words in the array, so such that, you know, we can check what do they start with, right? You know, and do that. How do we go ahead and do that, right? So that's exactly what we're gonna have to do, right? So we're gonna brute force our way into it, right? Pretty much, right? So I know that, you know, if, right, for a given word, right, you know, so for a given word, right, for us to obtain, so we could potentially use any of the words in the array, right? So for potential word, right, how do we find how do we find the longest common prefix? So we know the longest common prefix is going to be common across all of the different words, right? You know, so that's why we're going to start off looking at the first word, right? And looking at the first word, right, we're going to check, right? All right, so I think this project is called vertical scanning, right? You know, so we look at the first word and we check, right, you know, the remaining words in the array, right, if they start with the same character, right? So we're pretty much going to go character by character through the first word, right? And as we're going character by character, right, so we go to the first position, we go to the second position, and then we're going to go to the third, so on and so forth, right? But there's going to be a, you know, stopping condition, right? So as we're going through, right, we're also going to check the rest of the string, right? The other words in the string, the other words in the array, right? If at the same position, right, do they have the same character available, right? You know, you could think about stuff F, right? So I'm looping through this flower, right? So linear loop through this one, another loop to loop through the rest of the words in the array, right? You know, you see a nested for loop, right? So we check, you know, at your 0th position, right? You know, 0 index. We check this string, right? Did you start with F? Good. All right, cool. Do you start with an F as well? We go on to the next word. Do we start with an F as well? Good. All right, cool. So we go on to the next one, right? L, right? So we check L. Do you start with the L at the? Do you have an L at the second position, which is index 1? And then we check this one as well. They're in agreement, so we're good, right? And then so, all right, cool. Let's continue expanding, right? So we go to O, right? You start with an O. Do you start with an O as well at the index 2? No. Yes. Do you start with an O at index 1? No, right? So we are automatically exit and return FL as, you know, the longest prefix we're able to match across all of the different strings in the array, right? So let's say, for example, right, we added car in there. Car was in there, right? Then we would, at the first iteration, right, we check good. We're good here, 0 position. And then we see that it starts with a C, right? So we'll automatically return, guys, an empty string, right? Because, you know, that's the longest common prefix, right? Which is an empty one, right? So this one will be the same. You see that we check D, right? We check, so we pick the first word in the string, right? We just randomly chosen like the first one, right? We could have chosen any of the words, right? Right. So we decided to choose the first one, right? And then we just keep going, right? You know, we check D as your 0th position. Do you have a D? Nope, we don't. Right? You have R, right? So automatically return. Right, we don't even need to check the rest of the thing, right? Because we found a mismatch, right? As soon as we found a mismatch, guys, we just exit, right? There's no need to continue checking the other word, because as soon as there's at least one word that messes the array up, right? We'll automatically return, guys, right? So that's kind of how we have to think about it, right? So, yeah, so this is how the thought process was going to be like, right? Pretty much we start with the first string, right? And we try to match as much as we can, right, with the rest of the strings in the array, right? You know, with a nested for loop. As soon as we found a mismatch, we go ahead and return that that string, right? We were able to match, right? You know, okay. For example, in this one, we were to match FL, right, across all of the different strings in the array, and then we FL, right? Okay, so let's. So I think it'll make a lot more sense when we go into the code, and yeah, let's quickly go into it, guys. So it's going to be the initial for loop. Okay, so the initial for loop is I go to 0. So we're going to loop through the first string in the array, right? So the first string is the index 0, right? So we have access to it here. And then we do I++, right? So that's the first string, right? And then we're going to capture the character at that particular string, right? So char at I, right? So we got to loop through character by character, right? So we grab that character here. What we're going to do, let's do a for loop. This one is going to be a J, right? Let's call it that. So it's going to start at 1 because we don't want to, because we're going to look through the rest of the string, right? Because we're already looking at the first string and the array, right? So do J is less than TRS of length, right? And J++. Okay. So we just see, so this is the second loop to look through the remainder of the string of the array. Right? So we're gonna keep looping through. We're gonna check. There's gonna be if statement here. It's gonna check if TRS of J, right? So that particular, you know, right? Because we're gonna check every one of them, right? So that particular string, right? Char at yeah, so at the same position, right? You know, the same position that we're looking at. So for example, F, right? So flower, and then we see F here in the second string, right? So say J equal to 1. We're checking the string at index 1, right? We check if it's that character at the same position, right? Index 0, right? Does it equal? If it's not equal to that the same character as the first one, right? And the first string, if it differs, right? Then we know that, you know, there's a mismatch. And, you know, we return the matching matching prefix that we're able to match across all strings, right? That's what I was trying to say, guys, right? So it's substring between 0 and I, right? Up to that point, right? Until before we get the mismatch, right? You know, so from 0 to I, right? So we do I, you know, it's not inclusive, right? So that's why we were able to do that, right? You know, 0 to I, right? Okay. We get that. What else? And then say, you know, we need to handle that case. TRS. If it's, you know, we never got a mismatch, that would just return the first string, right? You know, that means that we're able to match everything, right, across the string. We're able to match everything, right? So that's what I'm trying to say here. Okay. So all right. So it might be tempted to say we're good, right? We're not fully out of the woods yet, right? So there's probably something else we have to do here. Let's for example, right, where we're given this case where we have, so we're trying to match A, B, right? So we check A is the same thing as A, right? But we go here, we're gonna get index out of bounds, right? Because we're trying to check at the second position, but this string doesn't have a second position, right? In index 1, right? So to avoid that case, guys, right, we're gonna do it. First check here, right? If it's greater, right, than the str, so this character, that particular string, right, you know, if it's greater than the length of it, then just return what we were able to match at that, before, you know, up until that point, right? Because, you know, it's not going to be part of the longest common prefix, right? Because, you know, the longest common prefix cannot be longer than the shortest string, right? You know. So yeah, so hopefully it makes sense. So let's press run code. Looks good so far. Let's press submit. Awesome, guys. We were able to pass all the test cases, guys. If you guys found value, you guys understood the thought process, let me know in the comment section. If you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, because we'll be doing a lot of other videos just like this one. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.